Well, first, I just want to thank you all for the opportunity to be here. It is wonderful to be among so many people who care so much for each other and for the planet. And for those who are not here, those hymns said it all, didn't it? Didn't they? The first one about nature, and the second about everybody else on Earth. It's really, really wonderful. I want to thank Tommy for inviting me to be here, and for Pam Kelly for introducing me to the wonderful world of Unitarianism and the people who inhabit it. I am here because I guess many of you share a common concern for the forest lands in which our communities are embedded here in Western Massachusetts. And our forests are only a part of the global ecosystem of forests around the world. But I want to try to point out to you why they are especially important. I'd like to share three important insights I've gained through my own work on climate change. First, on the technologies, and my wife and I took that all very seriously, what I learned over some 20 years working with scientists and engineers from all over the world about the technologies we need to be transferring to, and built a home designed with a wonderful architect and engineer and a builder, a home in Williamstown that was one of the first to be connected to the grid, but with its own solar panels, exported as much electricity to the grid over a year as it imported during the winter and during the nighttime. And because it was monitored by the Department of Energy, because it was so early on in the whole process, it's become a model which has been improved upon because the technology's improved, and you know, we do get smarter over time. Okay, I'll get a little closer. Is that better? Okay, all right. But more recently, I've come to realize that that's not enough. The technology we need to shift to is essential, but it's not sufficient. It will only get us partway there. And so I'd like to share three important insights that I've gained with you. The first is we must reduce emissions through our technologies. More efficient homes, more efficient vehicles, the purchases we make, and shift to using zero-emitting technology, like solar panels and wind, but technology alone is not enough. We must protect our Massachusetts forests that, along with the rest of the global forests, have saved us from planetary scale and climate collapse. I'll get into that in just a moment. And they must retain their structural integrity to continue performing these functions. They are not just a natural resource, but rather a vital organ of a living planet. Third, we must avoid acting on misperceptions about forests so that we can continue to perform their essential roles. Our middle-aged and mature Massachusetts forests must be protected because they are actively and will continue to moderate climate change, and we do not have time to wait for newly planted trees to do the job. Planting trees is a wonderful thing to do, but people in the 2070s will appreciate it. So despite this rather cold past winter, which reminded me of New England winters 25 years ago, it's pretty clear that we and the rest of the world on the whole are getting warmer, and I trust you've noticed that. And that you also know that 2024 was by far the hottest year for our planet in the last 2,000 years. It exceeds the global average temperature limit agreed to in 2016, the Paris Agreement that you referred to, Tommy, which every government in the world, including ours, agreed to limit future warming. There's a measure called the average temperature of the Earth. And I always ask my students, if you were asked to say, what's the average temperature of the Earth, where would you put the thermometer? And the answer, of course, is everywhere. And then take the average. And that's what we've finally been able to do, and the internet has made that a whole lot easier than it used to be. And the limit that was decided on was 1.5 degrees Celsius. And since Americans are, with 4% of the population of the world, are metrically challenged, which the rest of the people use, we continue to use the imperial units that we fought so hard to get out from under at one time, 250 years ago, and I can't help with that. But that's 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit. Now that doesn't sound like much of an increase. It sounds small, but it makes a huge difference. One of the IPCC reports that came out, the previous one to this last one, found that above about 1.5 degrees, natural systems really start to deteriorate. Coral reefs die out, forests begin to be less effective, wetlands don't work the way they used to. Almost every natural system is damaged above 1.5 degrees, not magically at 1.5. Some are a little below that, some are a little above it. If you get to 2 degrees, a lot worse things happen. But if you get above 2 degrees, it gets pretty horrendous around the world. Well, lo and behold, for every month of 2023, save one, and every month of 2024, the temperatures of that month exceeded 1.5 degrees. And every one so far in 2025 has exceeded 1.5 degrees. So that's the predicament we're in. And we can see what's happened. I mean, how stunning to have a major part of a major American city, Los Angeles, go up in flames in a wildfire, or a city in Hawaii go up in a wildfire. You know, wildfires are what happen in wild parts of Canada. Well, we had one of those last year too. We are seeing them in the Amazon. We're seeing them all over the world. Cities, Phoenix, Arizona, this really boggles my mind, experienced a record-breaking 70 days above 110 degrees Fahrenheit, when the previous record was 55 days, and the average is about 40 days a year. I mean, can you imagine living in a place with temperatures 70 days a year that are above 110 degrees? And these measurements demonstrate that the climate is now being transformed into a much hotter condition with unpredictable, highly variable weather conditions, because the Earth is not warming uniformly. The Arctic regions are much warmer, getting warmer much faster, 3 or 4 times faster than the average. And it's the difference in temperature between here at our latitude and the Arctic that determines our weather. Our warmer air rises and cools and sinks in the Arctic and then loops back down along the Earth and comes back down from the Arctic, and the Earth rotates under that, and we call that the jet stream. And we have messed up the jet stream. We have also messed up something called the polar vortex, which was a wind that swept around the Arctic that kept cold air in the Arctic pretty much, and we've disrupted that. That's why we get these wild swings in temperature, which then stay for a while. It will have droughts followed by torrential rain. We'll have heat followed by cold. Massachusetts will be colder than either Iceland or Alaska because the jet stream has dipped down and brought cold air to us, and it's gone up over Alaska and Iceland. So we've really changed things a lot. Our energy-intensive economy is driven by the burning of fossil fuels, that we all know. They release carbon dioxide. And carbon dioxide is a heat-trapping gas. It absorbs as the sunlight comes in, it's absorbed by the Earth. The Earth radiates heat back towards space, and carbon dioxide and other gases that we put in the atmosphere, some of them are there naturally, but we put more of them in than were there before, trap that heat, they absorb it, the radiant heat, and they re-emit it. Half goes up, but half comes back down to Earth. And in fact, there's so much coming back down to Earth from this re-radiation that we get more energy from that in a day than we get directly from the sun. So we've really done a job on the atmosphere. The adoption of new technologies is too slow to really bring this under control, but we have to accelerate that, no question about it. But what we have found is that remarkably, the amount of carbon dioxide that appears in the atmosphere every year extra is less than half of what we put in. That's really, let me just repeat that. What appears in the atmosphere is less than half of what we put in every year. And what is helping us out? Well, oceans are absorbing from the atmosphere every year an amount equal to about a quarter, and forests and plants on land about almost a third. So without those natural systems functioning the way they are, nice design, whoever designed this, good job. But it's only getting us halfway there. But what that means is, in reducing our emissions and finding there are two ways we can do this. We can change our technologies, emit less, and at the same time enhance the removal by our forests. It's kind of hard to figure out what to do with the oceans, although people are tinkering with that, and I'm a little worried about that one because they're going to change the chemistry of the oceans. And as a chemist, I know that that can be dangerous if you mess with the chemistry of anything. So by controlling the amount of heat-trapping carbon dioxide in the atmosphere, forests have done more than any other natural system to maintain what has been referred to as the benign, relatively stable climate called the Holocene era, from which all of human history has occurred in the past 12,000 years, since the end of the last ice age. Just think about that. Before that, humans were nomads. They had to be nomads because the weather changed so frequently. The climate was totally unstable. And through some condition, we don't fully understand why, the balance between growing forests and the uptake by the oceans was just balancing out in a very nice way for a relatively small human population that was burning some wood and clearing some forest a little bit. And so it's the fact that forests played an outsized role in making that happen. So in 2023, I was appointed by the Secretary of Energy and Environmental Affairs in Massachusetts, along with 11 other colleagues, by Rebecca Tepper, to serve as on a committee exploring forest as climate solutions for Massachusetts. And our report was released in January of 2024, and you can get it online. It's just www.mass.gov/doc/forests. So it's just doc forest, basically, mass.forests. So it's available, and you can read what we had to say. Now, 8 of the people on that committee were connected to the forestry industry. 2 of us were climate scientists who work with forests and climate, and 2 were forest ecologists who study how forests function. You can imagine that first meeting was a little difficult. We had different views about what to do and the relative importance of making forest products or addressing climate change and biodiversity loss. So I gained some real perspectives, though, and I have actually great appreciation and respect for what many foresters know about the forest and what they can do to manage it for far less destructively than it's being managed right now, when we do decide we need to produce wood products. But our New England predecessors decided that the 2 of the points we considered, which were forests were either a natural resource we can harvest and regenerate to maximize their economic returns, or they are obstacles to the expansion of towns, farms, industry, roads, and even renewable energy. Half of the loss of forest in western Massachusetts in the last probably 5 or 6 years is for solar panel arrays. We have plenty of rooftops. We have plenty of abandoned fields that are not going to be agriculturally productive. We have plenty of power line rights of way. We have highway rights of way. We have railroad rights of way. all kinds of places we can put solar panels. We don't have to cut down forests to do it. Well, our New England predecessors decided that indeed those were the roles of forests, and they deforested 60 to 80% of all the land in New England. Where we are right now was, I mean, literally barren. I've seen photos from the 1890s even, where it's just huge areas that are completely bare. However, by 1900, farmers were abandoning Massachusetts agriculture and sheep culture and heading to Ohio, where they deforested that whole forest. But they didn't have to dig the rocks. They just had to pull the stumps out. It was a much better way to farm. So Massachusetts today has regrown about 3 million acres of forested land, covering almost 60% of the Commonwealth's area, which I find remarkable because Massachusetts is the third most densely populated state. But it's all concentrated in the Boston metropolitan area, the Worcester area, and the Springfield Holyoke area. And then there are a few little towns like, Great Barrington and North Adams and Northampton and a few places like that around. But we've left, if you drive east to Boston on either the Turnpike or Route 2, it is astounding how much of this state you go through just forest land without buildings anywhere. Well, at some point, I realized, after working with people like Bob Leverett and Bart Barishis and others who have done a lot of work identifying where all these forests are and where the biggest trees are and where the oldest forests are, that this attitude that we had inherited is based on, all decisions are based on economic decisions. They're not based on ecological decisions. And forests function best when the rules are made by ecological principles inherent to the forest, rather than our decision. However wise and smart we are and how much ever we've studied, we can't know as much as the forest. I've often wondered, why is it that when forests are replanted, and we applaud that, oh, they cut that down, they reforested it, but it just doesn't ever look the same as a forest that is naturally regenerated or one that hasn't been cut at all. And that's because nature has a different way of deciding where the trees grow. We often get out a yardstick and make them, exactly 10 feet apart in rows. That's the worst. Or we decide which species we want because they're the ones we want to cut next time. And that's not what the forest needs. The forest needs a different mix of species. So I realized in this, while we're doing this report, that we were stuck in a thought trap from the 19th century about what forests were for, our relationship to the natural world in general, and that forests are not simply a natural resource. That was a light bulb that went off in my head. And nor should they be thought of as an obstacle to economic development. Forests were here first, and they are nothing less than a vital organ of the living earth. I've come to that conclusion after having some wonderful conversations with some indigenous people in the Amazonian region of Ecuador, along with some other colleagues of mine, scientists and indigenous people trying to put together what is the world and how should we be looking at it. It suddenly dawned on me that this is where we were stuck. It's not a natural resource. They are essential. The forests are essential to our survival, especially during this climate emergency. And what that means, if you have a real literal perspective, is that forests are essential to our planet's operating system. They appeared some 300 million years ago, and the present Earth could not function without them. And we are upstart human species who've been here less than 1/10 that long and think we know everything. And we know a lot, but we don't know everything. And in just the past 100 years, we've managed to reduce the amount of the Earth's forested land by over 1/3. And all of that carbon dioxide has gone into the atmosphere and added to the warming along with our fossil fuel emissions. So it was for me a real revelation. So even for those who celebrate forests for their intrinsic value, which I suspect is many people in this room, you just know a forest is the right thing, it's the right place, it's just great. We may be selling them short. They are not, yes, they're beautiful, and they're a storehouse of biodiversity. Wait, an ecologist said, Bill, you've got it backwards. I said, what do you mean I've got it backwards? 80% of species are in forests. Forests harbor biodiversity. She said, oh no. Forests exist because they are biodiverse. It is biodiversity that makes a forest, not the other way around. I thought that was a really profound insight, so I wanted to share it with you. They are a single biodiverse system, part and parcel of trees, birds, and other animals, insects, lichens, fungi, and unaccountable types and numbers of bacteria, all working together. And we're still discovering things about them. I mean, it's only been about 20 years since we've realized that these fungal networks are what make forests so much more vibrant, natural forests much more violent than anything we ever plant. It's just, you know, and when Suzanne Simard demonstrated that through some remarkable experiments she did, poo, poo, poo. What is she talking about? Mother trees, oh my goodness. We're getting into feminist forestry. We can't have that. She was right. And yes, our forests are beautiful, they're peaceful, they're magnificent, but more importantly, they are our single best defense against climate change and planetary collapse. They are really that important. In 2019, two colleagues and I published a set of observations we made that forests that had been allowed to continue to grow without harvest had the largest trees and held the most carbon and biodiversity. We didn't go out and discover that ourselves, we just looked at all the publications that were out there. And one of them that really caught my attention was published from some people out at Utah State University, which found that in 48 research forests around the world, all types, temperate, tropical, boreal forests, that if they were multi-aged, mature forests, meaning they had a closed canopy, they weren't necessarily old-growth forests, they had younger trees and older trees, a mix, that half of all the carbon was in the largest 1% diameter trees. Why is it 1% of the diameter? You know, the trees with the largest, just one out of every 100 trees, the biggest ones around, because that's an approximation of the volume of the tree. The height is only the height, but the diameter is squared. You know, so really it's the volume that's important, but the diameter is a quick thing you can measure, and just looking at that, they found that they held this vast disproportionate amount of carbon. So big trees do indeed store a lot more carbon. And there is a myth that is perpetrated by foresters that young trees grow faster than old trees. Well, young and old are relative, as I can see looking around this room. It's definitely relative. And so what is young and what is old? Well, it turns out that in our forests, our temperate forests here, the maximum growth rate is for a forest that's roughly between 50 and 150 years. That's the fast growing period. And we don't have many forests that are even over 100 years. We have a few remnants that are, we have 1,300 acres of true old-growth primary forest left in Massachusetts, according to Bob Leverett and others who've actually gone out and found them. Bart can probably verify or criticize some of that. Oh, louder. Okay. Here, how about this? That's better? Okay. So, so these are all important reasons. The resilience of a forest is determined by its biodiversity. It's not by anything else. That's what makes it resilient to a changing climate. And while there are some prototype technologies that are trying to remove carbon dioxide, I did a little calculation on this. The largest one in the world is removing 36,000 tons of carbon dioxide a year. It's in Iceland. It just went online. It's not clear that it's actually removing that much. The previous one was removing 10,000 tons. So that's not very much, because we're putting, we're putting something like 40 billion tons in the atmosphere. And it turns out that it's costing about $1,500 a ton to remove. So if we were going to reduce even by just a small amount, we're talking about a good portion of the gross world product of economic cost of all the services paid for in the world it would take to actually do much good. But forests are really removing huge amounts. As I said, something around a third right now. So something well over 11, 12 billion tons a year. What's more, if we didn't have forests, a significant portion of the Earth's livable land area would be desert. Water evaporated by forest redistributes rainfall through atmospheric rivers to areas that would otherwise be forever drought-stricken. We've actually just demonstrated this. The Brazilians have done it for us. For us, they have decimated much of the Amazon, and now all of the rainfall that used to occur in the eastern part of the state, where the cities are, Rio and São Paulo and so forth, and where they built all these reservoirs for hydropower, they're no longer getting the rainfall, and they're not even filling these reservoirs, and they're running out of hydropower. So we don't have, and this was a situation where the water in the Air River in the Amazon carried more water to the Atlantic Ocean than the Amazon itself, which is the largest river in the world. Didn't listen, and that's what's happened. So our eastern forests do an especially good job of maintaining the significant lower temperatures of our eastern United States because of the cooling from this evaporation of water. I mean, Boston is probably something around 5 degrees cooler than it would otherwise be if it weren't for the forest in western Massachusetts evaporating water and cooling the air that moves towards Boston. So add to this the role that forests play in providing oxygen, purifying air and water, decreasing soil loss, providing us with life-giving medications, while, as my colleague Susan Massino points out, soothing the nerves of frazzled humans who are calmed by being present in them. All of us have walked in a forest, and we all know when we come out we feel better. But it's important to recognize that while research that we've actually done, Bob Leverett and others have actually done, shows that that the forests that we have species that can live for 300 years or more, and yet the average age of our forests is probably is about 75 years in Massachusetts. So we have a long ways to go, and we can actually benefit from doing more. So if we protect sufficient forests and reserves to meet climate goals, there will still be sufficient forest available for less wasteful harvest. Somebody asked me earlier, what do I say to people who say, where are we going to get our forest products from? Well, one of the conclusions we've come to is that we need two kinds of forests. We need what I would call, the foresters call the forest that they manage for harvesting working forests. I think the forests that are really doing the work are the ones that are storing the carbon and doing the biodiversity, but let's not quibble over language. We'll just say the forests that are, I'll call them production forests that are producing wood products, and then there are earth protecting forests. We need to set those aside. We need to have more reserves that will do that. And that's something we can all work toward here in Massachusetts. And the state is committed to doing this. I haven't seen much action on it yet, but following our report, we got a good comment back from the Secretary of Environment and the Undersecretary for Environment and the Secretary for Environment and Energy and the Climate Chief that Massachusetts was going to enlarge the reserves we have, was going to add to them, And we're seeing this played out right now down in Mount Washington, where there's a large area that is being considered for harvesting, which is on hold right now because some people have put up some funds to do research that the DCR did not do. And they're finding, among other things, in biodiversity. What would you think? What would you think if you had a real biologist go in there and find the mother lode of salamanders in Massachusetts right where it was going to be harvested? What would you say about that? What would you say if you saw that the plan was going to decimate a number of wetlands when we have a Wetland Protection Act in Massachusetts? What would you say if you saw the largest stand of sugar maples in the whole of New England that was the center of the cutting project? So it's probably not a good idea. What the state will do with this, I don't know, but it's now been studied independently by other scientists. I would just say that I've been encouraged. I've gotten a lot of flack for proposing proforestation, which means to let forests grow to achieve their potential for carbon accumulation and biodiversity. Foresters don't like it. When I was highly criticized by a group of Yale School of Forestry faculty members, I said, well, I understand when you say there's no such term in forestry, because foresters have never thought about allowing trees to continue to grow, right? They're always being grown to be cut down. And so proforesting, which is different from reforesting, which is placing a forest that's already been cut down, or afforesting, planting trees elsewhere, those are all good things to do, but this is the one that really gives you the biggest gain. Just to give you an example, I was working with colleagues out in the Pacific Northwest, and we found data from the Forest Service on 700,000 trees in 6 national forests that had been protected from harvest for the past 30 years because of the spotted owl controversy. And what we found, this young scientist contacted me and a bunch of other people, said, I've just found this great data set, I've just found this great data set. Well, at my age, I'm not keen to go through big data sets, but young people are enthusiastic about it and they're good at it. And what we found was that just 3%, the 3% largest trees that the Forest Service wanted to harvest held 42% of the carbon in the entire 6 forests. I mean, that's just, it's disproportionate. It really is. So if we protect sufficient forest and reserves to meet climate goals, there will still be sufficient forest available for less wasteful harvest for forest products. But we cannot allow almost all forests to be open to unlimited harvest, a practice that has been reducing the average age of the U.S. forests to around 70 years, with fewer, according to the Forest Service, fewer than 5% of them are more than 100 years old in the lower 48. So I don't think we're being greedy when we're saying we'd like to have a few more protected. I was delighted when the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the report before this last one, came out and just said that this was an important, that protecting existing forest was an essential component for meeting climate goals. That's what we really had to do. And they cited our article, which I was very excited to see because it gave it more credibility. So, you know, many of us grew up thinking trees were a wonderful renewable resource, and that persists. And it was true as long as trees dominated terrestrial ecosystems and human populations were scattered and not too large, and before we began pumping the atmosphere full of carbon dioxide. Chopping down trees was a splendid and sustainable way to obtain wood fuel and living space. And a colleague of mine pointed out, this is a similar way, donating your blood to the Red Cross every once in a while for a few months is a splendid and sustainable way to help others in need. Now imagine donating your blood every day from multiple veins. That's not a blood draw, it's a blood drain. And that would jeopardize the donor's life. And that's exactly what we've been doing to our forests. We've been draining them. Draining the life force of a battered system that's absolutely critical for our survival. Another analogy is, think about your computer. It has all these valuable minerals in it, right? I mean, we're hearing now we're going to somehow work out a deal to take Ukraine's minerals away from them, and I don't know, on and on and on. Well, a lot of minerals are in our computers. They're in all those chips and everything that's there. And imagine if you just took them out at random in order to sell them to make money, how would your computer work? You know, I think that's what we're doing to our forests. And so I just would urge all of us to continue the work you're doing and to expand on it. Let me just reiterate what I think are the important points here. We must reduce emissions from our technologies, but that's not enough to help our planet to maintain a healthy planet. And forests in particular have saved our planet at the planetary scale, and they've saved us from climate collapse. They must retain their ecological integrity to continue performing these functions. They are not just a natural resource, but as I said, they are vital organs of a living planet. And third, we must avoid acting on misconceptions about forests so that they can continue to perform their essential roles. Our middle-aged mature forests here in Massachusetts and New England must be protected because we do not have time to wait for newly planted trees to lower the amount of atmospheric carbon dioxide to assure a safe climate in the time that we have. We have to reduce this, right, we were supposed to reduce 30% below 2010 levels by 2030, and then be carbon neutral by 2050, meaning we were not putting in more than nature was taking out. We failed already. We're not going to be reducing by anything. We've been increasing more and more between 2010 and now, and we'll continue to do so until 2030. So I think it's high time we honored our forests for their irreplaceable service, and we must stop using these misperceptions to justify the continued harvesting as it is being done. I don't think we should go out and try to stop all harvesting, but we should have enough protected areas that we can be assured that our forests are doing their part to address climate change. Let me just close by saying that I don't know how many of you may know this, that in Mohawk Trail State Forest in Charlemont, just off Route 2, stand the tallest trees in New England. Western Massachusetts, if you look at a density map, a forest density map of the Northeast, has the highest amount of carbon or biomass or tree wood, whatever you want to use, of any area in the Northeast other than the Adirondack Protected Park. And so there are these two big dark green blobs. One is the Adirondacks, and the other is western Massachusetts up into southern Vermont and New Hampshire, just down into the northwest corner of Connecticut. That is where it is. And we have several times the carbon per acre as Maine does. Maine has gone the other route, big time. Just simply harvesting trees, harvesting trees, harvesting trees. The paper industry took out just huge areas of forest, and they've come back. I was up there recently, and I said, well, why aren't they making 2x4s up here? And they said, well, there's no trees big enough, right? They've actually gotten them down to that size. So we have these incredible examples, and these very large trees hold 5 tons of carbon each. That's half their dry weight. And we need to call on the state to not only continue to protect those forests we have, those reserves we have, but to create many more of them. And also, there's work afoot to get private landowners. By the way, more than half of forest landowners don't want to harvest their forest. But Janie's going to college, and this guy's going to give me $5,000 to cut down my trees. Well, in fact, if they were being paid to keep those trees growing, just like we can get paid to put solar panels on our roof, more of us might do it. And so that's another thing that's being worked on at the state level. And I think at the workshop that follows, there'll be some opportunities to discuss some of the things that can be done at the state level. Bart will be there and others will be there to talk about that. So thank you all very much for having me.